Okay, so today's video tutorial is on the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution. And we're going to talk about how and why England industrialized. You want to make sure you have your paper notebook out. There'll be a few definitions you'll need to write down. The goals for this will be that you'll be able to describe the causes and effects of the Agricultural Revolution and to describe the causes and effects of the Industrial Revolution. So the definition for the Industrial Revolution, you can pause this slide and write this down. The period of greatly increased output of machine-made goods that began in England in the mid-1700s. That's the definition. Before the Industrial Revolution, people made everything by hand and at home. After it, work was done by machines and everything was made in factories. Believe it or not, the Industrial Revolution began because of experiments in farming. Wealthy landowners bought up a lot of land from small landowners. Because they had a lot of new land, they started to experiment with this land. It created new farming tools, and they also started to use new techniques in their farming. One of the new farming tools was the seed drill, which you see up in the top right corner. Farmers used to plant seeds by putting a bunch of seeds in the palm of their hand and just throwing them. That was called broadcast seeding. But it really didn't work well because the wind would blow and the seeds would blow away. Birds would eat the seeds out of the ground, so a lot of the seeds never even grew. The seed drill is that machine up there where it actually plants each seed in a little ridge or row in the ground, and it makes sure that the seed goes down into the ground so it takes root. That made it so that a lot more seeds took root and a lot more crops grew. They also did selective breeding of livestock. So if you were breeding cows for milk or for meat, you wouldn't breed every single cow you had, especially ones that were sick or weak. They would take their strongest and their best cows and breed those. So they would only breed more strong cows. And again, that increased yields of things like milk and meat. And then crop rotation, which you see kind of in a diagram here on the right. If farmers started to realize that if they planted the same crop in the same spot, year after year, it stripped all of the vitamins and nutrients out of the soil, and eventually nothing would grow. So they started to rotate their crops, so they were planting in a different spot every year, and that kept the soil healthy, and it made their crops grow more and be more plentiful. All of those improvements in farming led to something called the Agricultural Revolution, agricultural meaning farming. All of the improvements meant the food supply went up. Because the food supply goes up, living conditions and health improve. People are eating more, they're healthier, they're living longer, they're having more babies, the babies are living longer. So England's population skyrockets, which you see in these two charts. The one on the bottom right, the white chart, shows you by every 50 years in England how much the population increases. So you can see it kind of increases at a normal rate from 1700 to 1750, all right, from 5.5 million to 6.5 million. Then you have a pretty big jump to 1800 to 9.0 million. And then in 1850, it almost doubles from 9 million to almost 18 million. So that's when the big population boom occurred. You can also see it on this diagram above where you see a plot of England's population in relation to big events in history. So the Black Death that you guys talked about last year, you see it go down. The Agricultural Revolution, it goes up, and then it continues to rise in this period we're going to talk about. So this is kind of a really important point because there were so many more people, they needed to make goods faster to supply things for all these people. And this new population also meant that there were a lot more people to do the work that needed to be done. So this is when you see industrialization occur. Industrialization is the process of developing machine production of goods. You're going to want to pause this now and write that down as well. You also want to write down what's called the factors of production. These are the resources that are needed to industrialize. Okay, and you're also going to want to write down the 3 factors of production, which are land, labor, and capital. So in order for a country to industrialize, they need to have those factors of production. They need to have land, good land that they can put factories on, laborers to do the work, and capital, which is a fancy word for money. You want to put a little money sign next to the word capital. All right, England was the first country to industrialize because they had all of those factors of production. They had the large population, so they had a lot of laborers. They had a lot of natural resources, if you see in the map on the right, a lot of waterways that help transportation and power, and natural resources, namely coal. Okay, all those brown spots on the map are coal fields. They also had a really good economy, which had a highly developed banking system that would loan people money, so that's how you could get that capital. And one other thing that isn't a factor of production but that is useful is that they were at peace. They weren't in the middle of a war, so they could focus on industrialization. The first industry to industrialize were textiles, which is cloth. All right, and it's really because of the demand. There were so many more people, and they needed to find a way to clothe these people, and they needed to do it faster. So they created new inventions which sped up the process of spinning yarn and weaving cloth. All right, here's a picture of spinners and weavers in an old factory. All right, see them spinning the yarn here into these long threads, and then you see the weavers at these wheels weaving it into cloth. Oops.
This loom got a piece of kit.
Okay, sorry about that. So the new textile inventions, one of them was the flying shuttle, which you see pictured down here. All right, it sped back and forth on these little wheels, and it doubled the work a weaver did in one day. Sorry, keep hitting that. So there's a picture, if you've been to Sturbridge Village or something and you've seen one of those old looms, if you did it by hand, it would take a long time. That little tool made it much, much quicker. The next invention was something called the spinning jenny. An inventor named it after his daughter. But the spinners had to keep up with the work the weavers were doing, so they had to make yarn a lot faster. So the spinning jenny was a machine that allowed one spinner to weave 8 threads at once. Then you had other machines that fueled the machines and made work go faster. So the water frame, was a machine that used water power from rapid streams to drive spinning wheels, so they didn't need to be worked by hand. If you've ever gone to an old mill and seen a big water wheel underneath a factory that was spun by the power of the river, that wheel would be attached to gears inside the factory and would be powering machines. All right. So this is what the wheel would look like inside the factory. All right, and below that would be the river running underneath the factory, helping to move that wheel and turn all the gears related to these machines. So this started the factory system. Before this, all the work was done in home, and now everything was moved into a factory. They took all the workers, they took all the machines and the supplies and moved them into a factory. All right, now all these factories at the beginning had to be located on rivers because that was their power source. Okay, entrepreneurs is a word you might be familiar with. It's a person who takes on the risk of a new business. And you'd start to have entrepreneurs who would either open up a new business or they would just fund an inventor. For an example, an entrepreneur named Robert Bolton paid an inventor named James Watt a salary to just try new things and tinker and invent. And James Watt eventually makes a steam engine, which revolutionizes power in the Industrial Revolution. All right. They eventually take that steam engine and help it to improve transportation as well. So they put the steam engine on boats and make it a steamboat. And they put the steam engine on wheels, and you get a locomotive, or the early train. And then the railroad system starts to spring up all over England. And steamboats start to ship goods on rivers and also new man-made canals, like the Cape Cod Canal. And that's where we're going to end for today. So because of these new improvements in transportation, people could ship all of these goods that they're making in the factories to wider markets, and they have more people they can sell their goods to, and it also creates a lot more jobs for people.